Hello, and welcome to our deep dive into one of the biggest what-ifs in American history. On November 22, 1963, a moment of violence irrevocably changed the course of the world. But what if that motorcade in Dallas had simply driven on without incident? Imagine a world where John F. Kennedy not only finished his first term, but won a second. How would our history, our politics, and our very society be different? Would we have still landed on the moon? Would the Vietnam War have escalated into the conflict we remember? Would the optimism of the early 60s have endured? Let's explore this alternate timeline together. First, the political landscape would have been dramatically reshaped, and that starts with the 1964 election. But the most significant and immediate change centers on Vietnam. While JFK was committed to containing communism, he was growing increasingly wary of a massive ground war. Historical evidence, including declassified documents and accounts from his inner circle, suggests he was planning a phased withdrawal of U.S. troops, likely to begin in 1965, safely after the election. In our alternate reality, a surviving JFK is far more likely to follow through on this plan for de-escalation. This would prevent the massive commitment of hundreds of thousands of troops that occurred under President Lyndon B. Johnson. This single decision could have spared countless lives, both American and Vietnamese, and avoided decades of national trauma. It would have deeply changed America's role as a global police force for the rest of the 20th century. Next, let's consider the civil rights movement. There's no doubt that President Johnson, JFK's successor, was a master of legislative maneuvering. He used his political skill and the memory of the fallen president to push through the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But what about Kennedy? While JFK was a supporter of civil rights, his approach was more cautious. He was constantly worried about alienating the powerful bloc of Southern Democrats whose votes he needed for other parts of his agenda. Had he lived, his legislative victories on civil rights might have been smaller, slower, or less comprehensive. It is possible this could have delayed the full realization of legal equality and led to a very different political realignment of the South down the line. It is a complex and sensitive question. Would JFK's caution have been a setback for the movement, or would he have found another path forward? Now, let's look at the 1964 election and beyond. Assuming a successful first term, buoyed by a de-escalating Vietnam conflict, JFK would have been a strong favorite to win re-election. Securing 8 years in the White House would have had massive domestic consequences. This means Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society program's hallmarks like Medicare, Medicaid, and the huge federal effort to alleviate poverty likely would not have passed, or at least not in the same form or scale. JFK's domestic vision was different, perhaps less sweeping. The modern social safety net we know today might look very different, and the ripple effects continue. The political rise of figures like Richard Nixon in 1968, who ran on a platform of law and order in response to the chaos of the late 60s, would have been prevented or at least postponed. Without a Nixon presidency, the country would have been spared the turmoil of the Watergate scandal. Of course, one of JFK's most enduring legacies is the space race. He was a profound advocate for science and technology, most famously initiating the Apollo program with the bold goal of landing a man on the moon before the end of the decade. His survival would have likely provided even more consistent and dedicated political will for the moon mission. With a potentially far less expensive Vietnam War, more federal money could have been channeled directly into NASA. This might have even accelerated the moon landing slightly, or at the very least, ensured that the ambitious 1960s deadline was met without the major political hurdles and budget fights it faced later on. But Kennedy's vision for space went beyond just beating the Soviets. He was also very interested in space cooperation. In a famous 1963 speech at the UN, he actually proposed joint missions with the Soviet Union, an idea that faded completely after his death. His survival might have led to earlier, more significant U.S. Soviet collaboration in space, perhaps changing the hostile nature of the Cold War itself and turning a race into a partnership. JFK was keenly interested in the technological future beyond just space. His administration promoted research and development across the board. Without the colossal financial drain of the Vietnam War, it's fascinating to think where that money might have gone. We could have seen increased spending directed toward early computing, nationwide infrastructure projects, and environmental research. This might have accelerated the development of the internet or led to the creation of early environmental regulations, like those later championed by, ironically, Richard Nixon. The assassination was a brutal end to what people called the Camelot era. It plunged the nation into a collective grief and fostered a deep sense of cynicism and distrust toward the government that lingers to this day. So, what if that never happened? If JFK lives, the widespread cynicism and loss of innocence that defined the late 60s and 70s might have been delayed or significantly lessened. The new frontier ethos, that youthful, hopeful, service-oriented vision encapsulated by his famous "Ask not what your country can do for you" speech, could have endured. This might have fueled greater civic engagement and a stronger faith in public institutions. And what about the counterculture? The cultural upheaval of the late 60s, the anti-war movement, the drug culture, the radicalization of youth might have been far less intense. A huge part of that movement was unified by opposing a massive, unpopular, and televised war in Vietnam. Without that central cause, the counterculture may have evolved very differently, perhaps focusing more on domestic social issues rather than widespread anti-government resistance. Furthermore, the widespread and persistent conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination severely damaged public trust in government and the media. Without this watershed event, that trust might have remained higher, leading to a less polarized and more cohesive national dialogue for years to come. Of course, the absence of JFK's death would have rippled through global geopolitics. Let's talk about the Cold War. After the terrifyingly close call of the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had established a fragile, but direct, personal communication channel. A surviving JFK could have deepened this détente, possibly leading to further arms control treaties and a less volatile Cold War. His continued presence on the world stage could have fostered a smoother transition from constant crisis to a state of coexistence. Kennedy was also strongly focused on aid and stability in developing nations, pushing forward innovative programs like the Peace Corps. With less U.S. focus on a major war in Southeast Asia, more energy and resources might have been devoted to diplomatic and economic support in Africa and Latin America. This could have positively influenced the trajectories of newly independent nations and shifted the global balance of power. Ultimately, without the shadow of the Vietnam War, massive geopolitical failure, U.S. global credibility would have remained significantly stronger throughout the era. So, when we look back at this alternate history, the world is measurably different. We see a less cynical America, perhaps one with a delayed or altered civil rights timeline, but almost definitely one that avoids the catastrophic quagmire of the Vietnam War. Technology marches forward, buoyed by the space race, and the Cold War may have thawed slightly faster. The optimism of Camelot survives, leading to a potentially less divided nation. It's a powerful reminder of how much history can pivot on individual actions and fleeting moments. But it's not all a perfect picture. Would a second Kennedy term have ushered in an era of unparalleled progress, or would his own political challenges and the simmering social unrest of the late 60s have eventually overwhelmed his presidency anyway? What do you think would have happened? Would JFK have gone down as an undisputed hero, or would his legacy be more complicated? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed stepping into this alternate timeline with us, please give this video a like, subscribe for more deep dives into history, and share it with a fellow history buff. Thanks for watching.